activities and the calendar discussion. But before we get started, I will read the public comment procedure. The Pennridge School Board welcomes public comment. According to Policy 903, we remind everyone of the following. Public comment shall be limited to 3 minutes unless otherwise specified by the board. Participants must be recognized by the presiding officer and note their name and municipality. All statements shall be directed to the presiding officer rather than to individual board members, district employees, or members of the public. A speaker may speak once during each comment period. Please note that these sessions are designated for comments. To protect the confidentiality and privacy rights of all members of our community, the board encourages members of the public to direct any comments regarding particular individuals, such as students or district employees, privately to the superintendent or other appropriate administrators or board members, or to communicate with the board and superintendent privately by sending an email to psdschoolboard@pennridge.org. Questions raised and not addressed may be followed up at a later time. And so we have 2 people who have signed up for public comment. If you didn't get a chance to sign up for public comment, just raise your hand when the other 2 have finished. So Diane Herring first. No, we don't have a microphone anymore.
You don't have a microphone?
No microphone.
Okay.
Projection.
That's not a problem.
Yeah, right?
Diane Herring, Hilltown Township. My comment is related to the graduation venue discussion. In the previous meeting in which it came up, I brought to the board's attention the fact that the students were paying several $1,000s for the audio and video at Stabler Arena. It's also come to my attention that the junior class has been expensing all the flowers on the stage. So I'm hoping tonight during this discussion, when you talk about it and the recommendations, the fact that the students have been covering those expenses are addressed one way or another, since that money is coming from their fundraising, and that is something that they've been held accountable to budget for all these years, and it's taking away from their resources during their senior year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sue Furlong?
Sue Furlong, West Rock Hill Township. I'm going to hold my comments for the other meeting until the beginning of the other meeting, but for this meeting, I would like for you to check the calendar as part of this meeting and see if you have a school board meeting, probably this meeting, scheduled for November the 4th next year. Because if you do, you need to move that. That will be the eve of the school board election, and we typically have people who are running for office who are also incumbents, and so it puts a real stress on them whether to go to the meeting or in the evening taking care of maybe some pre-election things that they need to do, and I don't think that's fair. I've been there, and it's just, it's avoidable. So move that if you happen to have it. I believe the other ones are in the policy meeting. I hope that you did remember on the calendar to include a couple of the religious holidays from some other faiths besides just the Christian one. Just again, it creates less stress if you remember that in advance. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to make public comment? Come on, Kat.
Kathy Dearborn, Bedminster Township. I don't have a lot to say. I have a senior here at the high school, and I have others that have graduated previously. And I'm not a math person, I'm a nurse, but I went through and I counted all the numbers, as you all probably did for the survey, and I just hope you follow what the survey said, and that there won't be any more discussion, and it'll be that. Because a lot of times it's wellness, and I think you guys will be spending your time on other things, curriculum, class sizes, teachers, etc. That's all. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. If there's no other public comment, then we'll go right into the agenda. And the first item is the graduation survey results and recommendations. And I'll just, before I turn it over to Dr. Bolton, I will say I am looking forward to having this wrapped up. It's been a long time, but we were happy that we could have our new superintendent, who wants to be with us for a long time, to allow him to come in and take a look and hear from the community. So I'm eager to hear the presentation.
Thank you, Mrs. Coleman. Before I begin the presentation, just to address a couple of the questions and comments that were made at the beginning. The purpose of this evening and the purpose of the survey was just to address the graduation venue, so it will not be any of the other pieces that are addressed other than the scheduling of graduation, because we got some news today about that. So we are going to present that just because we want parents to have that as soon as possible from that standpoint. So all the other things that you spoke about, Ms. Herring, we will be talking about, but not this evening. As it has to do with the calendar, tonight's calendar presentation, which will come later with Dr. Price, will just be about the school calendar, and so the school board meetings and committee meetings are not part of that discussion though, but thank you for letting me know about that issue. So as we set those later after the December reorganization, we can think about that as well, and Dr. Price will be addressing the religious holidays. All right, so as you know, we were... Oh, thank you, yeah. We're going to turn off one set of lights just because it's a little easier to see from the back. Thank you, Dr. Price. As you know, we gathered feedback both from students and parents, just kind of overview of what we did through the process of that survey. Both surveys were open for 10 days, October 3rd through 12th. From a student standpoint, I put together an informational video based on questions that I had been asked walking around the cafeteria and gathering through emails, the things kids were talking about. And so I worked on the studio, one of their classes, and put together an informational video that then the students were presented during English class on October 3rd. There was a survey that was put together through Canvas. That way it could be assigned as a quiz, which means that way we were sure each student took it only once. From that standpoint, and all students knew how to access it. They had two opportunities for questions. One, they were asked to direct them towards their house principals, or they had access to the email address that was sent to the parents that was graduationquestions@pennridge.org. Their survey had 2 questions, and I'll be showing you that in just a second. Parents, very similar format. Again, open October 3rd through 12th. Information was sent to them through email. It was basically a scripting of the student video, but they also then did have access to the student video since it was prepared, although I hate my voice. They had questions then directed through the email address as well, opportunity to ask those, and I will talk a little bit about the questions that we received a little later. There were 10 of them that we received through the process, and their survey had 3 questions. So as we look at the survey questions, student survey, pretty simple. Given a choice, would you prefer to have graduation at Helman Field or Stabler Arena? And then an opportunity to just kind of have some open-ended comments or suggestions, because I find that often allows them to express things that weren't addressed there, as well as gives us some good ideas of what they're thinking about. So we did that on both surveys. The parent survey questions, numbers 2 and 3 were the same. Number 1, the only difference is that I could disaggregate some of the information. I asked parents where they currently had children. And so when you see the data, you'll see that it adds up to way more than the number of parents who signed up, because lots of parents have kids at multiple levels. And if you looked at the raw data, if you were the other person who looked at the raw data besides myself, you can find that parents marked lots of the categories in terms of where their kids were from that standpoint. The results, now this is just cut and pasted from the executive summary. So if you've seen the executive summary, this is not any different information than what was provided there. Along the top is a total in terms of all of the student votes added together, just to give you the student total in one place. That represented 77% of the student body. So I thought that was pretty good in terms of more than 3/4 of the students responded to the survey. If you look down, then I gave that information for each individual class in terms of the number of students that were possible, as well as the number of students that voted. And so I only had 2 disappointments in the whole survey. The first one was that the senior class had the lowest participation. I was frankly surprised. Not quite sure why that was, in terms of whether most of them didn't take it right then in English class, because they didn't have to. They had the whole 10 days to do it. And maybe freshmen took it right away because they were like, yeah, okay, here I go, I vote. And seniors were like, all right, well, I'll go think about it, talk to my friends, and then never got back to it. I'm not quite sure why that was, but in the senior class, we had 65% of them respond. We had 79% in the 11th grade, 81% in 10th grade, and 85% in 9th grade. So again, you can see the breakdown And in the 3 older grades, they voted pretty overwhelmingly for Stabler. In 9th grade, it was a little more even. Still favored Stabler, but closer to 50-50. Overall, it was about a 70-30, 72-28 split. The parent results. So again, the totals. We had over 1,800 parents or community members respond. 1841, 56% of them voted for Stabler, 44% of them voted for Helman. Here's that breakdown where if you add this, that will not add up to 1841. So what I did was down here, I did separate it just into 2 broad categories and said, all right, let me just look at people who only have students at high school or beyond. And so we know they either have somebody currently sitting at the high school or, assuming the one beyond went to Pennridge, which is an assumption I made, they have experienced graduation, as opposed to the other half, and these are people who do not yet have a student at the high school or had a graduate. And so obviously, I don't think there was any surprise that the vast majority of people who responded are parents who either have a high school student or had a high school student. But there were, 500 or so middle school and below parents that responded. And you can see that that did separate in terms of their responses, in terms of where they had children. Overall, it was 56-44. The breakdown was 60-40, 61-39 at the high school level, and then 57-43 at the middle school and below. From the results, the total, so we had more than 1,800 at both, and so there were 3,600 votes cast, which was wonderful. Across the board, this is if you add students and parents together. 2,300 or 64% selected Stabler, 1,300 or 36% selected Helman. I said that there were 10 questions that were asked. 8 of them came from adults. I'm assuming parents, although I didn't look that up. So I'm assuming they were, although the link was accessible to the public, as well as 2 students who sent in questions this way as opposed to through their house principal. General themes for the questions. Almost everybody wanted to take the opportunity to just say one more time what they thought, right? I think that's pretty common when you're doing an open-ended. Just in case you didn't get my vote, I want to tell you what I thought. So that was pretty common in terms of the questions. But the 3 most common questions had to do with Helman because that's the one that was different, right? You can't picture that because we've never graduated Helman. So they asked some questions about how would a handicap be handled at Helman? How would the logistics for moving inside if there were a weather emergency, how would that be handled safely and quickly? Because obviously if it's an emergency, you need to do it quickly. As well as some delineation of the cost estimates and some questions around that information that was there. So I think they were surprised that that email address came straight to me. I did that on purpose, so when I wrote back to them, a lot of people went, oh, sorry, good to talk to you, from that standpoint. And so I did interact with all 10 of those and did provide a response to all 10 of those questions and then a little back and forth from that standpoint. I used my dissertation coding and did some positive theming for both places. Wanted to be able to, in the executive session, I'm sorry this is a little hard to read. In the executive summary, wanted people to kind of get a sense for the people who favored Helman, what did they say? And the people who favored Stabler, what did they say? And there really weren't any surprises. I think if we would have sat down and said, what are they going to say, right? What are the benefits of Helman? What are the people going to say? And the 4 most common themes were the connection to the high school, right? It is Pennridge. Less travel time. It's in our community. Better for family celebrations after the event, right? Less logistics. It's closer. The time is a little more flexible. And then obviously staying in the Pennridge community. I then provided what I thought were pretty representative. The top 2, and I didn't delineate this in the summary, the top 2 were from students, and the bottom 2 were from parents. And I just went through and tried to find ones that covered these 4 themes, but also spoke to what the person who voted Helman would have said. So just to kind of give you a sense, if you didn't want to read all, there were about 1,100 comments that were made. If you didn't want to read them all, here give you an overview of what that looked like. I did the same thing for Stabler. Again, I don't think the themes were surprising. A set date and time. And so obviously since it's indoors, if we say graduation is on June whatever, graduation will be on June. Inside and air conditioned. It has worked in the past, which is a pretty common theme. I read the theme, the phrase, if it's not broken, don't fix it, multiple times. The fact that there are 2 more tickets for family and friends, and then probably the largest one had to do with the viewing of graduates on the large screen in terms of Stabler and being able to see from that standpoint. Again, 2 comments from students, 2 comments from parents that were just kind of representative of what the people who voted for Stabler said from that standpoint. We have made, and it's actually still there, but it was sent out through an email, the information to the public, and so we did send out the executive summary, which you've now seen again, as well as the raw data. I'm enough of a numbers junkie that when there's a survey, I want to see that. The only thing I did to the raw data was I scrubbed it from a standpoint of if it was identifiable, I took it out. There were a couple people who signed their comment, and so I took the signature out, but not the comment, because the whole point was you didn't know it was going to be posted, so before I posted it, I wanted to be able to respect that for anybody. I scrubbed anything that had nothing to do with graduation. Had some kids who took some advantage to go, oh yeah, and can you make lunch 15 minutes later? You know, or the Wi-Fi stinks, you know, those types of things. And so I made note of them, but I took them out of the survey because I felt like that was not the point. And actually, frankly, my second, anything that was not identifiable. This was more in the student comment than the parent comment. Sometimes there are random words and letters that students put there that I'm always afraid mean something to the rest of the student body, but not to me. And so if it didn't spell graduation or something of that standpoint, I took it out. And so if your child goes, they took out my comment, you should ask them what they wrote. Because I don't know. I don't know what the abbreviations were, and so I always was assumed if I could. This was actually my second disappointment from some level. I talked about the representation of the senior class. There were some comments that I had to scrub from a content standpoint. From a standpoint of the words that the person chose to use were inappropriate for a public posting. And it wasn't just in the kids' survey. And so I was a little surprised the number that I had to cut out, either words that are inappropriate or the whole context of, you're an idiot if you think differently from me. You know, like those types of phrases that were like, okay, express your opinion, express why, but we don't need to be name calling and things like that. So some of that I scrubbed. So if any of your neighbors say I took out part of their comment, you could ask them what I took out from that standpoint. But that is all I scrubbed. Everything else is there. I fixed some formatting, but other than that, the raw data is there for you. So from a recommendation standpoint, based on the percentages, I had members of the cabinet meet with the high school administration. We did look at the survey as well as their experiences at Stabler, because I obviously had some clarifying questions since I have never been there for anything other than a concert. And so the recommendation is the graduation ceremony for the school district will continue to be held at Stabler Arena. What has routinely been done, and I think I saw Mr. Bona here, so I'm going to put you on the spot if that's okay with you. Mr. Bona, we're going to talk a little bit about what we do with Stabler to be able to get dates for graduation.
So we have 2 dates tentatively secured. We have Thursday, June 13th, and that's assuming we have no poor weather throughout the winter. If we do have some inclement weather, we need to push it back. We secured Tuesday, June 18th at Stabler. So those are the 2 dates that we have. So Lehigh did confirm with me today that those dates are good to go, that those dates are secured for us. We just have to wait the winter months to see how the weather pans out.
In hopes that we have none. I'm going to repeat those again just in case you didn't have your pen handy. And I didn't put it in the presentation because as of about 2 p.m. today, we weren't confirmed from Lehigh yet, and so I knew we were asking, and so thankful Mr. Bona for reaching out and for Lehigh getting back at the right time. When we look at dates, what has happened in the past is there are 2 dates that are sought. One that is the preferred date that is as close to the last day of school as possible, and that for this year is Thursday, June 13th. When you look at the calendar, Friday, June 14th is the last day of school. Students will graduate the night before. Everybody else will come to school the next day. And so if there is not too much weather activity, because we do have a day of school that we can forgive because we go 181, and there are 2 snow days currently built into the calendar. So if there are 3 snow days, we would be fine. The last day of school would not move and graduation would be on the 13th. We do then secure a date for the following week so that if there are multiple snow events and we're backed up into the following week, I did the calculations, there would have to be 5 snow days that would push us back to that Tuesday as the last day of school, in which case we then would graduate that Tuesday night. We will send an email out to the senior class so the parents get those dates on their calendars, but go ahead and post it on Facebook. They are secured at Stabler. Our graduation is on the late side of what happens at Stabler. Many school districts are earlier than us, so Stabler is willing to hold both of those dates through the winter for us. And so there is not a time constraint about when they all of a sudden say, no, you have to pick tomorrow. What my recommendation will be to the school board is that we wait until the March board meeting and make the final determination at that point based on winter weather. And we'll bet that hopefully the last week of March and the beginning of April that we will not have any further weather. Obviously, if we get to March and there have been no snow days, that's easy. We could announce it then, right? Because then we're going to just assume we won't have 5 days in the month of March from that standpoint. And if we do, then the date is announced and we go from there. But we do have both nights secured, and graduation will be on one or the other of the 2 days. Any questions from the members of the board? If the chair is okay, may I ask for questions from the
Yeah, that'd be
audience,
great.
just in case? Right, just because of the topic, we don't normally do this. Are there any questions from a clarification standpoint? Because my guess is your friends know you're here, so they'll text you first before they text me. Yes. So,
My only question is, at the last meeting, you discussed the potential, it was brought up, the potential to move from Stabler to an alternate arena facility. Obviously, time constraints being what they are in the current year, it's one thing. Is that something that the board would still continue looking at going forward for another year?
What I obviously have not spoken to the board about it. What I have asked is that the high school administration will be scoping out PP&L and whether there are any other events, although that's the one that's usually talked about in terms of this area. They did visit it once and do have some price things, and they did attend an event there, so they could kind of see apples for apples. But under no circumstances will that be for this year. We did feel as though from a time standpoint, we were not going to do that. This sort of was a survey on indoor versus outdoor, although Stabler, not necessarily, but that is one of the pieces I think we heard in terms of some of the pros for Stabler would be similar pros. And so that is something that we will discuss, but I do not know whether there will be a recommendation moving forward for future years or not. Any other clarifying questions from any of the parents? Please.
I have a question. Aside from the venue question as far as going forward, indoor versus outdoors is something we're going to be looking at every year?
No.
Gosh, I hope.
Oh. Yeah. Actually, I assume you have to never answer that emphatically. No, unless the board tells me to. But no, the expectation coming out of this timing is not that it's forever, right? Obviously, there could be something that 4 or 5 years from now, the winds have changed and there's a conversation to have it from that standpoint. But the expectation is that for multiple years, this will be an indoor graduation for the class. Now, whether that is at Stabler or not, I think can be a conversation, and we would involve the kids and the parents of the seniors in that process through that if we were to recommend any change, okay, in future years. Okay.
Could you just clarify, because I know we had a lot of parents that had asked why the price breakdown was not included. Could you just clarify for them why that was not included?
Yeah, I answered it 3 or 4 times in terms of it was, like I said, it was a common question. The question was asked as to why were there not specific prices given as part of the survey. And that really comes down to my belief that if you're going to present information, the information needs to be accurate or you don't provide it. And so when I came, there had been multiple conversations about this and there had been multiple price expectations done. There was one in April that was published that was part of a board discussion, I think maybe even an activities committee. And that document had been posted, and that document had like a $16,000 or $18,000 difference between Helman and Stabler, with Stabler being the cheaper option. When I looked at that and talked to the administration about that, that estimate was simply done based on if we duplicated Stabler at Helman, what would it cost? So if we did the same things for screens, if we did the same thing for seats, both indoors, 2 different places, and we ran all the same wiring and tried to make it exactly like Stabler at 2 different places at the high school, we got the plan for indoor and outdoor, what would it cost? Because at that time, they weren't asked to get a specific price. They were just kind of saying, is it more expensive? Can you look into it? So they did, right? And so they got that information. I then met with the IU. The IU said, well, we've got some options in terms of live streaming that would make it cheaper. And I went, great. Well, we're not going to sit down and plan for that unless we know it's going to be at Helman, right? To actually sit down and plan a graduation at Helman if you don't know it's going to be at Helman makes no sense, because the amount of work to plan a graduation is not a small task. And to ask our high school administration to do that the first month of school did not seem fair. And so what is clear is that Helman would not have been $18,000 cheaper. I mean, would not have been $18,000 more, but I can't tell you what it would have been. And so that's why I tried to say, all right, so say it's $5,000 either way. I don't care, it's the kids' graduation, it ought to be where they want it. All right? And so that went into the survey from that standpoint. I think some people felt as though then perhaps I was hiding something, and so they asked me the question. in terms of to clarify it, so I tried to clarify it as best I could. I, at this point, still could not give you an exact price difference because we did not logistic the graduation, right? They had plywood on the entire floor out on the field. You don't need it on the entire field. So that saved $2,000, right? We talked about could you have done it in the auditorium instead of one of the gyms and still have the same number of seats? Well, probably. Well, that saved you setting up the seats, which was $3,000. And so there were lots of things that because they simply duplicated Stabler, made those estimates, which was perfect for what they needed them to be in April, but it was not exact numbers coming into the presentation. Sure.
Anything else? I feel like I want to applaud. I'm so happy. I really am, and I thank you, Dr. Bolton. This was so thorough, and I think it removes all of the questions that anybody possibly could have had, and it heard every single person who possibly could have had an opinion on the subject. And I just thank you for taking the time to go through it, and I do hope that it's the decision forever. Maybe not forever.
As long as you're
For a
here.
long
You don't
time.
have to deal.
That's right, 6 more years at least.
And I appreciate that I was the voice of it tonight, but really Dr. Price and Mr. Bowman, I don't know how many times I asked them questions about this. And so
Yeah.
for them to be in the room, I do need to thank
That's
them.
true. Yeah.
Because they obviously were the experts from a standpoint of living it for multiple years. And so anytime I had a question, I was like, oh, come on up, we need meat. And so they were constantly sitting down and talking graduation with me, sometimes answering the same question multiple times. So I do appreciate that from them as well, but thank you.
All right, great. Oh, and before we go on, I just wanted to note if anyone who's going to speak, if you can stand up and go to the podium, you know, whether you're presenting or having a comment or question, it just makes it easier for the recording in this room, okay? All right. Now we're moving, the next item on the agenda is the Special Olympics Memorandum of Understanding, also known as an MOU. Dr. Price?
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Cullen. So tonight, we will be looking for support for a memorandum of understanding between the Special Olympics of Pennsylvania and the Pennridge School District. The length of the agreement would be from the day we sign this until the end of the school year. And it's a great opportunity for our students, grades 9 through 12. And this would be for students that meet the Special Olympics criteria, students with special needs, and they would be partnered one-to-one with a student without special needs to participate in track and field this spring. This memorandum of understanding includes funding for the coaches, it includes equipment, it includes training, resources, uniforms for the students, shirts for the coaches. It's funded through a grant that they have obtained. So I've asked Mr. Babb to come here and to just give us kind of a little overview of what this would look like in the spring for our students.
Dr. Price hit it right on the nose. It's a great opportunity for our students with intellectual disabilities. It provides them an opportunity, in our district, an opportunity for to help give them an opportunity to participate that blends Title IX, so it provides an opportunity that these kids didn't have before. And it also gives us an opportunity for the kids that are in general ed classes to participate alongside with them. And what they've found in other districts that have done is Souderton does it, Central Bucks East has a team, Palisades has a team, and some others in the area, North Penn, Cheltenham down the road. It's kind of been growing, but what these schools have found is it decreases kids, basically their fear factor dealing with kids with disabilities, their bullying, their teasing. It kind of helps them rub elbows with these kids, and it also provides an opportunity for the kids to enhance their athletic ability that have special needs. Right now, if we have a kid that wants to participate on a team, we let them try out, but there's not necessarily a fit as far as our athletic program, and this really provides a great fit. The kids can participate in 4 running events. They can participate in 4 field events. They have things that are modified. You know, they're doing events up to an 800, and they're doing relays. And then they're also doing field events. They're doing a shot put. It's a modified shot put. It's a modified javelin. It's a plastic safe javelin, and then doing a long jump. So it basically is the same season as a spring sports season goes. So that'd be this year. I think it's March 4th, and it's 10 weeks. The kids are going to participate 2 times a week. We have 2 teachers that are interested that teach special ed that have won track in the past that they want to help out with, and a lot of other coaches. We actually have a track coach that teaches at the Central Bucks YMCA, teaches track and field down there to special needs kids. So there's a lot of interest. We have a Best Buddies club here in the school, and we're going to try to get some of those kids that are in that Best Buddies club to come out and participate in this team. It's pretty much a serious sport. They do a physical just like a PIAA athlete would in our school. It's not endorsed. It's not a PIAA sport, but it is endorsed by the PIAA. So actually, these kids can compete. For instance, our kids are going to compete in 2 meets this year, and then they're going to go to a regional meet. If they continue to qualify past regional meet, the Special Olympics will fund their way to Shippensburg, where the PIAA has their meet, and these kids can participate in a state championship along with it. And the Special Olympics will pay for it. So it's a great opportunity for them. We're kind of in a mode right now where we're going to see how it works out this year, kind of starting small, and hopefully it'll gain speed. The maximum you can have is 30 kids. They'll pay for 30 kids. For every special ed student that you have, you need to have a general education student equally. So if you have 15 and 15, that's the max you can have for the 30 students, and they'll provide uniforms, equipment, and all that for them. So it's a great opportunity. I'm looking forward to it. Mr. Bone has really been pushing the last year or so to get it going, and fortunately we have a lot of staff that are eager to do it, and over the last couple of years we've had some special ed kids that have run track. Years ago we had a girl that swam, and I think they would really have enjoyed this even more, I think. So, any other questions about?
David, I'll just add that along with this program comes some resources, and the resources from the Special Olympics are, one's called Inclusive Youth Leadership, and that's working with either one of your current student clubs or even the possibility of forming a new club where some of these students with special needs, bless you, could be involved in a club and kind of have a leadership role. And then another one is whole school engagement, which was talking about the possibility of planning some engagement activities for students to focus on inclusion, acceptance, improving school climate, all of those things that schools definitely need and always need to work on. So that's a whole nother off the field, off the track piece of this. And then the last thing is, we mentioned all the great things that are covered by Special Olympics through this as far as the monetary piece. There are will be some minimal costs to the district with this. And Mr. Babb and Mr. Bona have budgeted for this. Of course, you're going to need PIAA officials like you would for any student activity like this. Some game workers, a nurse might have to be available, and some of the students may require a PCA if that's written into their IEPs. There's a possibility. You don't know who the students are until they sign up, so we can incur costs such as that. So there are some minimal costs that we've prepared for, but the big stuff is covered by Special Olympics. So it's a wonderful opportunity. So thank you, Mr. Babb, for bringing this to us, and Mr. Bone.
And can I clarify something you said? The costs that are estimated are already budgeted for this year. This was something that you would hope to bring to the budget for this year, and it already includes those numbers.
Yes, there's not a separate, correct me if I'm wrong, there's not a separate breakout line item for this,
Right.
but when you were planning for officials and game workers and those sorts of things, you made sure there was enough in there to cover these events.
Yeah, we're going to run one meet here. That's our goal. Is to do one meet here and kind of go from there.
When you said there'll be 30 students,
Yeah.
how do you decide if more than that would like to do it? How do you narrow that down to 30?
I don't know, you know.
That's a good problem to have.
We're gonna have tryouts. I would anticipate it'd be more like a first come, first serve.
Okay.
Whoever gets their paperwork in, which is, it's detailed, and there's a commitment involved with that, so.
And I would suggest that if we're gonna definitely do this and we sign and move forward, which I hope we will, that we'll contact some of these other schools that have been doing this for a period of time and we'll hopefully learn from maybe some of the mistakes that they made early on
Yeah, the
and
teams I've seen
we
are
can ask them these
small.
questions.
6, 7, 8 special needs kids, and then paired up with, their buddies.
How does this compare to what Sourton does?
Same thing,
Same thing?
same thing.
So it, really the max of participation is 15 special ed students as athletes. That's the max, okay. I just want to make sure I wasn't misunderstood.
And they compete right alongside, so they'll take, let's say there's 30 kids, they'll take them and we'll do a time trial and practice, and it could be a regular ed kid, it could be a special ed kid, but we'll put them in heats, and when we go to run against Sourton, there'll be heats according to how they're running, and they'll race against, common times and common opponents. Right alongside with, regular and special ed.
Thank you, I'm really glad we brought this forward and Mrs. Bowden brought this forward because I think this is great for our kids and I wish we had started this years ago.
Yeah, we had a boy a couple years ago, he would have been a gold medalist, I'm sure. He ran track and played loved it.
Does anybody else have any other questions? I think it's a great idea too, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
And if there aren't any objections, we would move it forward to the meeting. Going back to the graduation thing, do we need to take any action on that at the board meeting? No, it's just, okay. I don't think so. I just wanted to make sure before we went
Right, yeah,
ahead.
thank you.
But with this, if no, we'll move it ahead to the board meeting for approval. Thank you. All right. And our last item on our agenda is the preliminary 2019-20 district calendar. And it is very preliminary, but we're going to have a discussion. I'll let Dr. Price cover the particulars.
So I'll start by saying at this point, since this is the very first attempt at a draft, and we're talking about this probably earlier than ever before, we're not distributing and posting, making public copies of the calendar because it is subject to change, and this is a draft before we even sat down with our other upper Buck schools to look at it. So this is a first attempt at coming up with a calendar that works. So I guess I'll start with kind of what this timeline looks like as far as all the steps this goes through. I don't know that we ever talked about this publicly before. So it starts with really a draft of making sure your dates for the calendar year themselves are correct and kind of taking last year's, saving it into a new document and redoing the actual calendar itself. And then working with the cabinet, the district office cabinet members team, the administration team, to kind of just look at that initially and try to remember feedback from the prior years and try to incorporate all the things that you've heard. And it's so much of a challenge to try to make everyone happy, as you know, with the district calendar, because you can't have everything. And when you take something out or you want to put something in, it's kind of a give and take. So we try to come up with a draft that's at least a starting point in October. And then last week, and Mrs. Walters is on this committee with me, our Act 48 committee met last week, and that's the first committee that starts giving feedback to this. And then tonight, the Activities Committee will be able to give feedback. Then on Wednesday this week, I go to our Upper Bucks Technical School and meet with Palisades and Quakertown and the technical school folks. And then we start looking at how the three schools compare. So I need a draft, at least a starting point to go into that meeting. And then we try to get as much to be as common as we can with the calendars. And we have to keep in mind teacher contracts are a little different in the districts. The technical school has their own number of working days, and so we can't all just do our own thing for every day in the calendar. I'll go back to cabinet after that meeting, and our next cabinet meeting after that would be around mid-November. I'll take it to our principal meetings. Principals will be able to give feedback. And then we'll come back to the Activities Committee in January. January 7th is the next meeting. And then hopeful board approval would be at the January board meeting. So in time for that activities committee meeting, we would post that version going into that committee, so you would see it at that time. So tonight it's kind of just some open discussions. Board members, you have a preliminary draft for what I call an option A and an option B. And they're lettered, numbered at the top of your paper there. So option A is patterned after the current school year calendar that we're living right now. Not a lot of change except adding in a couple things here. I'll highlight what we're talking about. Well, one was adding a Jewish holiday. That is, Rosh Hashanah was added on September 30th. Another change compared to the current year would be that the Easter Monday would now be a snow makeup day instead of the Thursday before Easter. Meaning we'd make up on a holiday as opposed to an in-service day. I'll talk about that more in a second. And then finally, snow makeup day is added in December. When looking to decide, do you give that Monday before Christmas break, December 23rd? When I look at that, I kind of work backwards and I go into June and I say, okay, we'll give it that day off, take us into the next school week or not. And we were already into the next school week anyway, so that's why I put that in there, because I don't think attendance would be so hot anyways that Monday. But then I made it a snow makeup day, thinking that, who knows, with the rains we've been having, you could have hurricane flooding or who knows. So threw it in there, but then made it an immediate emergency weather day if we need it. So that's a little bit different based on just the way the holiday fell this year. So that's the big difference is kind of the other in-service days, the other professional learning days fell into line pretty much where they did this year. So again, this was kind of trying to duplicate it. Labor Day in this version falls on the 2nd of September. So based on the rule of thumb we've been following lately, that if Labor Day falls on September 1st, 2nd, or 3rd, we start after Labor Day. So in this example, we would be starting after Labor Day again. And we said at our, just as kind of an update on that, we said at our last activities meeting that we would not change this for this coming year, kind of this pattern, because we have our other schools that we're working with that are already planning this. So kind of just mapping this out for the next 10 years of Labor Days. And Amanda DeWitt, my administrative assistant, and I, sometimes we have to project into a decade from now and things we can't possibly predict, like student numbers, but we can predict Labor Days. So we can tell you when Labor Day is going to be in 2028. And so if we say this one's going to be after Labor Day, then after that there's 4 straight years that we'd be starting before Labor Day. And then finally in 2024 we'd be back to starting after for 2 years. And then 3 more years of before. So after this one, there'd only be 2 out of the next 9 years that we'd be starting after Labor Day if we don't change anything. If we decide to change it, what we said in April was we would give ample notice to families and to the other schools, and we would say, okay, we're always going to start before Labor Day if we decide to go that way, and that's going to start with the year 2024. So there'd be plenty of notice. So the point of that whole thing is, I guess, in this next calendar, 2019-2020, after that, we start before Labor Day for several years. Even if we do nothing, it'll be 4 consecutive years after that. Version B, and then we can talk.
Can I clarify something about the Jewish holidays?
Sure.
And so on the draft, both option A and option B, you are recommending an increase to both Jewish holidays. Can you talk a little bit about currently what we do and what the rest of the county does in terms of the Jewish holidays?
So currently, the 3 Upper Buck schools are the only ones that do not give a day off, at least 1 day off for each of those 2 Jewish holidays. And so in the past, we have only given off for Yom Kippur. And so this would be adding 1 day for Rosh Hashanah. And if you look at the Upper Bucks, or if you look at Bucks County in general, it's split. It's about 50-50. Some days, some schools give off 2 days for the holidays, some give off 3 days for the holidays. This would put us closer in line to that. And again, this is before having discussion with Palisades and Quakertown, and this is a proposal that Pennridge would be making, and that is in both version A and version B, is a day off for each of those. So the day that it falls, schools that give only 1 day for each, that's when the schools would be giving it off across the county.
If we do that and the other 2 schools decide not to,
do we leave the option open for our tech students to still attend the tech school on that day if they want to?
We can leave that option open, but I don't know that there's gonna be good attendance on a day such as that. I don't know that we wanna do that for a Jewish holiday, because you could have technical school students that, you know, are practicing religions and we're not sure of the religions in practice. So I would say if we're gonna do that for religious reasons, that we would say it's an all or none thing.
How does that work then? Do our students just lose one day of tech school? Is that what would happen?
If the other schools do not, if the tech school is staying open for the other two schools and losing a full day, yes, and some of the programs are hour sensitive, so we can't be different on a full day like this too often throughout the calendar.
Right.
So, and I can safely answer that question more when I say what's the end result and how many total days would be different. And cosmetology comes to mind. I know that's very.
Right, and that's why I was thinking if it was optional, then if students were worried about their hours, could go if they wanted to.
I mean, we could certainly have that discussion, and that's one of the things that we would do if we dismiss early. And version B, that would be an option for them. We would say you certainly really should be attending, especially if you're hour sensitive in those situations. There are days that our students go because they need the hours. It's not always a one-to-one that every single time the home school's off, the technical students are off, and that's not just at Pennridge. You try to do that as often as you possibly can, but there's times in some districts when those students start earlier than the homeschool students do, because they have to get certain, and they might finish a little bit earlier. So as long as they're getting the program requirements in, the bulk of these days can hopefully be the same. So version B, just flip the calendar over, version B has all those same pieces as version A that I just mentioned, but then also includes one additional piece, and that is an early dismissal day, one per marking period for professional learning purposes. So, and by the way, there's things that I kind of made huge or bold, and when we would publicize this calendar, we wouldn't have some of these things in there, but to make it easier to understand, that's why kind of you see the bright blue as well. So the bright blue, one each marking period, that is an early dismissal day. That would be K to 12, and that would be set up with the goal of obtaining about 3 hours of professional learning at each level. So we'd have to stagger the dismissals. And I have the principals working on what could that possibly look like if we wanted to still serve lunch, all your lunches on those days, because we don't lose the lunch subsidy. And so that's the biggest challenge here, is what would that schedule look like and still have enough time to be able to do something meaningful at your building level. So we have some approximate times of what that could look like as far as work for transportation as well as for the buildings. So that's a piece that would have to be worked out. Another piece that would have to be worked out is the effect on kindergarten, if we're going to dismiss those 4 days. But the good thing is, if you're planning in advance, it's not like a last spare of the moment thing for weather. You can plan for this and you can be precise with your dismissal times, assuming you don't have weather in those days. So that's the purpose of those 4 days. Of course, the trade-off is you lose some instructional time. And that's why you have to balance the number of days you're picking to do this. So in this draft, we just picked 1 day per marking period. Just to give you an idea, we have to meet the hour requirement that we are giving by PDE, and also the day requirement. So the day requirement is 180, and then the hour requirement for our high school and our middle school is 990 hours. And then for our elementary, it's 900 hours. We'll take half of that for a half-day kindergarten, that would be 450 hours. We are above that, and still well above that for all levels, even with taking off these early dismissal times. High school would be losing 13 hours, of course, across the 4 days. Middle school would be losing just a little bit under that, 12.67. Elementary losing 12 hours. If you look at the required hours compared to what the state requirements, high school and middle school need 990. High school would still have, even after this is deducted, they'd still have 1037, so they're still above it. Middle school would have 1175, they're way above it. Elementary 1068, so that's with those hours deducted. So we're coming in, prepared for this, and even with not making up the first snow day, that's 181. That's actually a day above and beyond as well. So we're still in good shape hour-wise, it's just philosophically, do we want to put in early dismissals or not? Do we want to, do we value the ongoing professional development throughout the year and making it meaningful? We've talked about this in the Act 48 committee, and I think we had more than one board member that's been on that committee. Megan, you were on at some point as well, and so we've heard that every year, the need for that ongoing professional learning, and also this remedies a parent-teacher conflict in November, where teachers have expressed concern about teaching a full day, having evening conferences at night, and then teaching the next day. The November early dismissal would be the Friday after those evening conferences, so that kind of helps with that situation as well.
So during that, oh, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to clarify for everyone else, when you're talking about that ongoing professional development, and you referenced the conversations that we've had before, I just want to explain that what Dr. Price is talking about is that you have these professional development goals for the teachers, and to be able to do it throughout the year is more helpful because then they can implement it as you go along, right? And it lines up, it helps them to bring it into their teaching more rather than just having it, at the end of the year or at the beginning of the year. So that was something that we were trying to do, was to make it so it was more consistent throughout the year. Did I?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, yes.
Go ahead, Megan.
And we're limited on hours because some of our professional learning days are dedicated to other things that are just kind of things you have to do. Teacher online trainings, for instance, things like that are just requirements by the state. You have to do these to maintain your certificate. We from time to time give hours for something such as that. So to actually dig deep and for teachers to be researching and learning the skills in a pathway that they're choosing, because since we're now looking at professional learning pathways and having some choice in their professional learning, to do that early in the year, and then many times they don't have a day until late spring when we would have this opportunity again. So we need something to bridge that gap in there instead of just an occasional day here and there. So that was the thought process going into this.
Also, weren't there some staff development days that then get bumped because it's a snow makeup day? And then if you have a special in-service professional development planned around new curriculum, it doesn't make sense then. You're supposed to touch base mid-year, and then it doesn't make sense, now it's got pushed back to June. So now what's scheduled, and you will switch it out but it doesn't make sense, and it's, disconnected to do it then in June.
Absolutely, it's another benefit to have it in there. That's one of the reasons also in this version you'll see that the Monday after Easter was a makeup day on a holiday as opposed to the in-service day in April. So in February, in both versions, an in-service day is a makeup day. In April, it's a holiday, thinking you don't have both professional learning days bumped at the end of the year. I don't know if our other colleagues in the county are going to go for this or not, but that was a reason for that, was so you're not going to bump more than one full day to the end of the year, and they already have a day at the end of the year, so that adds a second one to that. So, but yeah, Lisa, you're absolutely right. If we keep putting snow makeup days as the in-service days, all of a sudden all those days get tacked onto the end, and you lose the timeliness of it, and the students that year don't benefit from the professional development.
Right.
When you said they would have the early dismissal, because I know one of the big, and thank you for, first of all, I agree with everything that you said. I mean, the pathways, we're giving them, I think it's great that you've been implementing these pathways, but giving them that time throughout the year to actually do it is important. The November date that you're talking about on Friday, when you say it would be early dismissal, was that the discussion, because I know when I was in that committee, the discussion was about those long days in November. So they're still going to be here the same amount of time. It's just that it would be professional development rather than an entire day of teaching after they're here at night, right?
Correct.
So it's just shifting what they're doing,
Yes.
basically.
Yeah, that on this calendar, so the Thursday before Thanksgiving is one of the traditional evenings of parent conferences. So on the Thursday before, they would teach all day on this calendar on November 21st. They would have conferences at night, and then the next day, that Friday, they would only have students for a half day of teaching, and then they would have professional learning in the afternoon, so a little bit of a lighter afternoon, and an opportunity for professional learning. So if you notice, we also didn't put those early dismissals on the same day of the week. because we're trying to balance it being a benefit to teachers, being a benefit to presenters, being a benefit to families. So sometimes we're able to make it a 3-day weekend for students and families, other times you can't, and you kind of change that, because you have to balance as well. If you make it on a Friday or a Monday, some people are going to take off. They're going to, because you're going to have a long weekend, and then you're still not getting what you wanted to get out of it. So that's why this was mixed as far as days of the week where it fell.
One other thing, so since you're lowering the number of snow makeup days, that would affect those days getting pushed to the end of the year. Just a thought, but since you're adding that December 23rd day, instead of automatically making it a snow makeup day, couldn't we make that a professional development day? And it's, when you're putting in all of these different snow days, and you have more snow days than you do professional development days, if you have the professional development days, I mean, it's one more spot where you can plug one in, right? Rather than having it at the end of the year, and then if more get bumped back, that's one more you can move up.
Well, right now according to the CBA, needs to be minimum 10 in-service days in there. So there's 10. There's 10 total accounted for. One of them is their responsibility for multiple evening conferences, and that's how you get one. So that's not actually earmarked in here, but there's 10 total if you include that. The only thing that we worried about for the 23rd, making it a staff required day, was we worried about attendance. And people wanting to have that week off, especially if their children are off in their schools. So we worry.
But wouldn't you have the same attendance issue with a snow makeup day? Because then not only are you worrying about staff not coming in, but you're also worrying about students not coming in.
You are, but at least you're telling in advance that it's a possibility. You are. I mean, and the odds of using that day probably aren't great. But if we were going to put it in there, I mean, we could take it off. But I thought the odds weren't great. But it's one less day we have to tack it in at the year. That's the only reason I put that there. If we get the majority of students and staff there, we get credit for it, regardless, so.
I guess I'm just looking at it too as like, how productive of a student day is it going to be that day? Where as a professional development day, it might be more productive, and it's a little bit more of a laid-back day for teachers rather than a teach-all-day day for teachers. But, and then the other thing, was there any consideration to, building in some professional development where a grade level, because I've seen some other districts do it where they will have an entire grade level be able to do their professional development, and then they bring subs in for that grade level, and then you're not missing the instructional time, and they just rotate which day. So, this day, subs will come in for 4th grade teachers, and 4th grade teachers will have that professional development time, and the kids are still learning. Has there been any consideration of that, so we're still keeping the instructional time, but also giving that professional development to teachers?
So we do that to some degree, especially with some of our new, being a writer program, for instance, when we're training teachers for some of these programs, we do pull the teachers out that are a part of those programs. I don't know that we've done it to be patterned so specifically, grade level by grade level, because I think you would have some of our principals say that the level of instruction is not the exact same for some students. A different type of lesson that you're preparing for them there. So as a year plan, I don't know that would be an option that they would go for, but certainly when needed, and we need to get grade levels together, or to get the teachers participating in a pilot or a training together. I know Dr. Weir, your department is taking advantage of that, as has the buildings as well. So it's definitely a piece of everything that's happening there, even if we don't say there's a formal full year plan that's laid out that way. We do that right now. They come right into this classroom here, and there's subs for those teachers.
And Ms. Bates, one of the things that this method helps is the difference between a full day and a half day in terms of utilizing teacher travel. The type of planning that you're talking about, if you don't do it with subs, I do understand you talked about subs, we would not use up some of our professional development time having teachers travel on a half day, which means those are dedicated to building goals or district-wide things that can be done in your home building. And there are some of both of those. As opposed to something like tomorrow, which is a full day, and so teachers can travel. We are doing grade level. The whole elementary crew will be at Grass tomorrow, and so they'll have an initial presentation, and then all the first grade teachers from the entire district will be in one space working on one thing. And that level of collaboration is really, really powerful and is rare. But if you think about the days, like if you're looking at option B, October 14th is a full day. January 31st is a full day. There are those full days that are built into the calendar as well that allow for the type of collaboration you're talking about, where the half days is that balance of the building level or some what I'd call more generic district things that you don't have to collaborate for, but you're learning. Maybe it might be an online module or something we have to do.
Any other comments?